Hello, welcome to More Yoga with me, Emily. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you are well. And as I am used to saying now, if you're not, hopefully you'll feel better after this yoga session. I'm going to get a little bit technical here with some anatomy, but what it means is we're just going to be releasing the low back today. So there is very recent research that shows that cerebral spinal fluid, right? So that really great fluid that helps our spine moving and keeps the brain working, drains not just into the cervical lymph nodes, but also into the lumbar lymph nodes, lumbar meaning lower back. So jumping really to the conclusion, there is a very definite, clear connection between the brain and the lumbar spine. I don't know if this has anything to do with like COVID brain fog, from people sitting more a little bit at home. My low back feels way tighter than it normally does. My brain doesn't feel like it's working quite as good as it normally does. Maybe it's a very tenuous connection, but there is certainly a connection between the low back and the brain. So my goal today, or at least my hypothesis, is that if we really release into the low back, then maybe the brains will feel clearer. Usually after 30 minutes of exercise anyway, my brain feels a little bit clearer. So low back tightness can be caused by hip flexor tightness, joined by hamstring tightness, and glutes that don't fire quite as quickly as they should. I'm not going to say weak glutes, but just ones that aren't firing. And that tends to be pretty common for everybody unless you're lifting heavy weights every day as part of your job. So for today's class, if you have something like a chip foam block or a yoga block or even a pillow or a rolled up blanket or something like that, that's going to be really useful to help get into the low back. Sound good? I'm assuming you're saying yes. Let's start lying down. So right away, this is when we're going to use the prop. So I'm going to take this block, even though it's a little bit harder than those foam blocks. I want you to bend your knees and plant your feet and then lift your hips up and then bring whatever you're using underneath the pelvis. So not under the low back, kind of more the pelvis, the sacrum, that big flat bone at the base of the spine. So depending on how high your hips are, you'll feel more or less sensation here, but any sort of lift is going to help release through the low back a little bit more. Take your feet mat width apart and let your knees hang in toward each other. So this is just where we're going to start. And then for a few breaths, inhale through your nose, exhale, sigh your breath away. Couple more. And allow your breath to settle into its natural rhythm, natural depth. And there's no need to deepen the breath here. Excuse me. And notice if this feels like quite a bit of tension, then maybe lower your hips a little bit onto something lower, or just come down to the floor entirely. But this is not a position that our bodies are used to being in. So gravity will feel a little bit weird here. If you have any sacroiliac dysfunction or SI joint dysfunction or pain, this is one of the best ways that you can reset that. Last couple of breaths here. And slowly, when you're ready, start to heel into the feet back into center. I want you to keep whatever is underneath your pelvis there and start to draw your knees toward you. So a variation of supported snail pose. Essentially what this lift does is it's just going to make it easier for the knees to hang in without having to use your arms to draw them toward you. Now you can, if you wish, add a clasp of the arms onto the knees or over top of the shins to get even more flexion, right? More rounding through the spine. Maybe you just let the arms hang out by the side. Sometimes, and I should have mentioned before, it feels really nice to bring like a strap or a belt around the knees here so that you don't have to use the arms and you don't have to use any muscular activation to keep the knees toward each other. So a few more breaths here. Now, if for whatever reason, maybe your low back feels super awesome these days and this isn't where you need to be, then you could reach your legs up to the sky for a variation of, you got it, shoulder stand. Right? We're not going to go into full shoulder stand. It's not something I'm comfortable teaching over the internet or indeed really in class at all. But Viparita Karani, legs up the wall essentially is what this is a really great variation. So either legs extended or knees bent, wherever you need to be. And we're going to be here for another few breaths. Ideally, right, if the low back is quite tight, you would just be in this supported snail position for 5 or even 10 minutes a day, along with the other stretches and activations that we'll be doing. And then when you're ready, start to bring your feet back to the floor. Press into the feet to lift the hips up so that you can remove anything out from underneath of you and then pause for a few breaths. It might feel like your body is sinking through the floor. Right, it's quite a deep flexion, so we're just going to allow that to settle. And then let's set up for bridge pose. So feet on the floor, knees bent, and then bring your feet hip width apart-ish, parallel-ish, close enough into your bum that you can tickle your heels with your fingertips. Wrap your shoulder blades toward each other on your back, and you might have your arms extended here by your side, or maybe you take robot arms. On your inhale especially, press your feet into the floor. Inhale, lift the pelvis and spine up and away, and exhale, lower back down. So just a few of these on your own time. Inhale to lift, exhale to lower. So we're starting to warm up the glutes and the hamstrings, right? Getting the opposite movement now through the spine. So spinal extension rather than flexion. And doing this in a safe range of motion is a really great way to help support the low back. Not to release it, but to strengthen it. Next time you come up, pause there. Squeeze the bum a little bit more. Hug the heels in toward you. Last couple breaths, as high or as low as you need to be. Okay, slowly exhale, lower back down to the floor. Couple little windshield wipers of the knees. And then, as always, maybe start to rock and roll up and down your spine here. Maybe you choose to roll to one side and press yourself up, but let's all meet on hands and knees. Let's get a little bit more movement through the spine now, through cat and cow. Hands nice and wide. Inhale, lift the tailbone, hollow through the lower back, broaden through your collarbones. Exhale, tuck the tailbone under around through your spine. Couple more of these. Inhale into cow. Exhale, round into cat. As always, if there's any other natural movement that you would like here, feel free to add on. Little wiggle of the hips from side to side. Maybe big barrel rolls through the chest. You could snake toward the floor. You could send your hips back toward your heels, really getting into the low back a little bit more here. Go where you need to go. And then slowly come back to center. I'm going to bring a chip foam block underneath my left knee. We're going to do a little bit of single knee balancing. So if you would like some more cushioning or support like I'm going to have, then go ahead and set yourself up and then come back to hands and knees. From here, step your right toes back behind you. And then little lift of the lower ribs up to the sky. You might stay here, or maybe you start to de-weight that right leg. Make sure that you don't lift it so high that the low back starts to dip, right? So press the low back up to the sky, reach the heel further back. Option to stay here, or option to reach the left arm forward and up, thumb to the sky, palm to the right. So strengthening the back line of the body. Right? Press the floor away from you. Reach that arm up and out of your peripheral vision if you can. Keep breathing here. Last 2 breaths. Okay, and bring your hand, your leg back to the floor. Little wiggle or shake. And if you're using the padding, switch it over to the opposite side. And then set up again. Step the left leg back. You might choose to stay here. Maybe you de-weight that left leg, reaching the heel further back. So when you look back, maybe you can see your toes, right? If you can't, if they're lifted so high up that you can't see the toes, then lower that leg a little bit more. Maybe you stay here. Maybe you reach the right arm forward and up, thumb to the sky, palm to the left. Press those low ribs up to the sky, especially, right? So that you're not dumping into the low back. Instead, we're strengthening it. Last couple breaths here. And exhale, release it all to the earth. Little wiggle or shake or cat and cow. And then I'm going to switch that chip foam block back to my left leg. And on the inhale, step or sweep your right leg forward. So we're going to get into the hip flexors now, right? Because if these guys are tight, there's no way the low back can be as long or as not loose, but as untight as it could be. It's back out of the hips. Hug your legs toward each other. Squeeze the bum on that back leg. Belly button to spine. Shoulder blades onto your back. Maintaining all that. Shift into your front knee. Right, so we do this often, this really active variation of a low lunge. I'm concerned less about going into the full yoga variation today, unless you can really keep the squeeze of the bum and getting into those hip flexors on the left side. You might press the palms away from you a little bit more on that front side to send the shoulders back, getting even more extension at the hips. Last couple breaths here. You could float the arms up to the sky if you wish. Right, wherever you need to be. It could be hands on blocks. Okay, on your exhale, shift your hips back as you extend through your front leg. Half splits on that right side. If you have a deeper variation of splits that you'd like to go for, then feel free to slide out. Otherwise, stay here with me. You could have a hand on a wall for more support, or maybe blocks, or on the earth. Wrap that left hip forward as you draw the right hip back. Not so much that you're really twisting to the right, but you don't want to be opening up or lifting that hip. Why? It's not dangerous. You're just not getting as good of a stretch. So my knee is quite bent because I feel really tight today through my right hamstrings, and that's okay. Right? I'm just acknowledging my body where it is today. And then flare the toes on that front foot as much as you can. And then peel those front toes back toward your shins, right? Back toward your face, so that you're getting into the calf muscles as well as your hamstrings. few more breaths here, right? Loosening the hip flexors, loosening the hamstrings, and activating the glutes are all three really great things that you can do to release into the low back. Okay, on your inhale, sweep or step forward, and then bring that right knee back. Little wiggle or shake, and then let's switch sides. So again, I'm going to use that padding underneath my right knee, and then inhale, step your left foot forward. Come on up to half kneeling. So get all those activations going again, right? Hug the legs toward each other, squeeze the bum on that back leg like crazy, belly button to spine, shoulder blades on the back, and then sink into the front knee. I didn't have to go very far forward today to really get into those hip flexors on the right leg. I'm going to send my knee back slightly. There we go. Okay. And you'll know, right? The more you squeeze the bum on that right leg, the more you're going to open through the hip flexors. Maybe you send the shoulders, the torso back slightly, giving even more extension there through the hips. And if you want to go into the full sort of yoga variation, you're welcome to go there. Just make sure that you don't hyperextend, right? You're not arching into the low back, because that's the exact thing that we're trying to prevent here. We're trying to release. Last couple breaths, really squeeze the bum on that right leg. Okay, on your exhale, shift your hips back as you extend through the front leg for your half splits. Again, hands can be wherever they need to be. And then if you have a deeper variation, feel free to go where you'd like to go. Otherwise, wrap your right hip forward. Draw your left hip back. It's almost going to feel like you're dragging your front heel back toward you. Micro bend or even a deeper bend on that front knee. Flare the toes on the front foot. Peel them back toward your face a little bit more. And then try to take the tension out of the neck and shoulders. That was as much for me as it is for you. Last few breaths here. And then on your inhale, come back into that front knee. Plant your hands, swing the leg back, come back, hands and knees, little wiggle or shake. You could stay here moving and grooving if you'd like to. You might choose to take child's pose, particularly with knees together. You're going to release into the low back a bit more. Or maybe you choose to tuck the toes and lift the hips up and back into downward facing dog, right? Wherever you need to be for a few breaths. You might pedal the heels here to the floor, getting into the calves if you're in down dog. If you don't want to be here, that is totally fine. Go where you need to be. Last couple breaths wherever you are. And then if you're in child's pose, press yourself up either to hands and knees or downward facing dog. And then bend your knees, look forward, take as many steps as you need to come into your standing forward fold. Okay, so more releasing through the hamstrings. You could rest your elbows on your knees or thighs if you'd like more support today. You could clasp opposite elbows with hands to get even more traction through the spine. But what I don't want you to do is to lock the knees out, or even worse, hyperextend them, okay? Because this is not good for your joints in the long run. It might feel okay today, but trust me, in a couple of years, you're going to pay for it. So keep a little micro bend in the knees, or even a deep bend, right, wherever you need to be. Particularly with the knees bent, you're going to release more tension out of the low back than you will with legs straight. Legs straight in forward fold will generate tension in the low back unless your hamstrings are really loose and long.
And then release your hands with fingertips to shins or the earth or blocks. Inhale, little partway lift, belly button to spine. Exhale, let it all go. 2 more. Try not to round through the spine as you lift here. If anything, think of a little mini back bend. And then bend your knees, head heavy, arms heavy. Slowly start to roll up to standing. 1 vertebra at a time. You can use your hands on your thighs if you'd like more support. And eventually coming all the way up to standing. Couple loops of your shoulders, up, back and down. Little wiggle, noodle, or release. All right. Feet hip width apart. Let's get into the glute strengthening portion. Not necessarily everyone's favorite part, but it's the key component, right, of those 3 things that we can do to help release the low back, aside from just stretching the low back. Okay, on your inhale, sit into chair pose. So hips down and back, tailbone down slightly to feel your belly button engaged toward your spine. And then don't worry so much about the arms because we're going to be here for a while. All right, finding that center position. And then start to send your weight over to your right foot. Come onto the toes on the left foot. Keep chair pose on that right leg. Couple taps up and down, maybe with that left foot to find your balance. And extend the left leg forward. Bring it back to center. You can always tap down. Out to the left. And up. And then back. And up. Out to the left again. And up. This time curtsy to the right. And come back up. Okay, find center again. Pause in the middle. And then go all the way over to the left. Come up onto the toes of that right foot. Make sure you've still got chair pose. Knee bent, hips back. Couple taps up and down with that right foot. And extend the right foot forward. And then pick it up. Or tap down in the center. Take it out to the right. And then center. And then back. And center. Back out to the right. And center. Curtsy to the left. And center. Come back to chair pose. Maybe go a little bit deeper. Knees out. Last couple breaths here. Okay, inhale, come all the way up to standing. Oh, shake it out a little bit. Bend the knees. Let's take some hip circles. One direction and then the other. A little twist. Okay, inhale, sweep your arms up to the sky. Flip your palms skyward. Grab hold of that right wrist here. Lift a little bit taller as you exhale. Pull the wrist over to the left. Think of sending your hips to the right. So getting a nice opening through the right side of the body. Right? We're doing lateral flexion and extension here. Again, it can help get into the low back. So bend the knees, tuck your tailbone under, round through the spine, pull a little bit more to that left corner of the mat. And then inhale, back up to center, shake it out a little bit, and then we'll switch sides. Flip the palms skyward, grab the left wrist this time, lift a little bit taller. Exhale over to the right, send the hips to the left. Couple breaths here. And then bend your knees, tuck your tailbone under, round through the spine. Pull the top right corner, or pull to the top right corner of your mat a little bit more. And then inhale, come back up, shake it all out. Okay, one last thing that's really good for the low back because it brings it into neutral, but it's also good for your glutes. A squat. So feet shoulder width apart, maybe mat width apart, toes turned out. On your inhale, sit down into your malasana. Now this might not be where you need to be today, and that's okay. You can always take the feet a little bit wider, rest your elbows on your knees or thighs. You could bring a block behind you to sit down, right? Getting a really great release for the low back without having to do quite so much work for the glutes. And then make sure that you're not just hanging out here, right? So find some buoyancy, some lift. If you had to stand up, you could. Maybe you stay here, wrapping those shoulders onto the back. Maybe you reach your arms forward and up. Maybe you clasp your hands behind you. Last couple breaths, wherever you need to be. Squats are really one of the best things that we can do for the low back. I know, it's like that medicine that tastes horrible. Nah, I love squats. Bring your hands down, sit down. Oh, shake out those legs. Take a little windshield wiper of the knees. Okay, and then find somewhere where maybe your heel can slide a little bit more. So you might turn to the long edge of the mat, particularly if you have hardwood, right? My mat is really sticky, so my heel's not going to slide anywhere. Tuck your right shin in. It's just to get it out of the way, right? We're not trying to do any weird pose here. And then bend your left knee. Now, option one is to just hug onto that left knee and round through your spine. Option two is to take your right hand to the outer edge of that left foot and then round through the spine, really puff it back. Now when you're up here, you're probably getting a nice release through the shoulder blades and the back, upper back. If you'd like to send it more into the low back, this is when you start to slide your heel away from you a little bit. I bring my left fingertips out to the side and kind of press them away so I get even more puffing through the spine. So we're definitely getting into low back here. It's just on the right side. QL, multifidus. Last couple breaths. Okay, and then slowly release. Shake it out a little bit. And then right away we'll go the opposite side. So tuck your left shin in. Again, maybe, depending on how it feels today, you just want to hug that right knee and round through the spine. Or grab the outer edge of that right foot and then round through the spine. I like making that sound. I feel like I sound like Carl Sagan. Okay. Maybe stay up here. Maybe you've got lots of tension through the upper back and the shoulders today. Wicked. Maybe you stay there. Or maybe you start to slide the heel away from you a little bit, getting more into mid and low back. You could press the right fingertips or palm away from you on the floor to get even more puffing into the left side of the body. Right, puff out and back. Last breath here. Okay, and then slowly release. Little windshield wiper of the knees. And then let's roll down to the mat. You can always use your hands to lower yourself down or roll to one side and then come down. Or maybe tuck the tailbone and just take a little Pilates roll down to the mat. And then once you're down, hug your knees toward you. Take a little rock from side to side. And I always like to have some sort of twist at the end of a class, so let's go there. Right arm out to the side. Maybe you shift your hips right a little bit. As you exhale, lower your knees to the left. Getting that full spinal rotation. Sometimes the tension that is generated in the low back is from stickiness and rotation, so that's why we do this. As gentle or as deep as you need. And then inhale, come back to center, reset your pelvis and your spine. Maybe shift your hips left a little bit first before you exhale and lower your knees to the right. Allow the breath to settle. Allow the mind to settle. Maybe it's feeling a bit more focused, a bit clearer after working into the low back. Maybe it's just feeling clearer after doing 30 minutes of movement. Last few breaths here in this twist. And then inhale, return to center. Let's do one happy baby before we come down to rest. So draw your knees toward you, take them wide out toward your shoulders or your armpits. Maybe you stay here. Maybe you kick your feet to the sky. You grab the backs of the thighs, somewhere along the legs, the ankles, or the feet. And essentially here you're in a squat position, but you're on your back. So very, very good release for the low back, right? Keeping it in neutral. Also a great release for the adductors. Last couple breaths. And then think about where you'd like to go for your rest. You might end the same way we began, with a block or a pillow underneath your sacrum and hugging your knees in toward your chest, or taking the feet mat width apart. You could rest on your side or in child's pose or anywhere you need to go. And there is certainly no rush to get there. But once you have found your pose of rest, for 3 breaths, inhale through your nose. And exhale, sigh your breath away. Couple more. And then continue breathing your natural breath. So let go of the breath control. Notice if you're holding any last muscle gripping or tension, particularly in the neck or the jaw, in which case allow that to settle a little bit more as well. And then stay here longer if you can, 5 or 10 minutes. Thank you so much for joining me today. Namaste.